Ethan Walker heard the scream and pulled his horse so hard the animal nearly threw him. Not a scream of surprise, not a scream of fear. Something worse, the scream of a woman who already knew no one was coming. He rode toward it anyway. What he found at the Carter Ranch that morning would strip the calm from his bones and replace it with something he had buried for years. Something that felt uncomfortably like rage. If this story moves you, subscribe and follow until the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this tale has traveled. The gunshot cracked across the Montana plain, like a whip snapping against bare skin. Ethan Walker did not flinch. Men who had spent 3 years riding with the 7th Cavalry learned fast that flinching got you killed. But he did pull his horse to a full stop, one gloved hand rising slow and deliberate on the reins, his eyes cutting west toward the Carter land. He had been on his way to Millhaven to buy feed. That was the whole of his plan that Tuesday morning in October of 1878. Feed for the horses. Maybe a cup of coffee at the Dunbar counter if Ruth Dunbar wasn't in one of her moods. Then back up the mountain before the afternoon clouds rolled in. Simple. Quiet. The way Ethan Walker liked his days. The second sound erased all of it. It was not loud. That was the thing that stopped him cold. A woman's cry carried on wind could sound like a hawk or a trick of the canyon walls. But this sound was low, and swallowed the kind made by someone who had learned a long time ago that volume brought more punishment than mercy. It was a sound that understood itself to be useless. And still it came. Ethan turned his horse west. The Carter Ranch sat on 400 acres of good grass between 2 creeks, the kind of land that made men greedy just looking at it. Victor Carter had homesteaded it 26 years ago and built it into the most productive spread in the county. Everybody in Millhaven knew the name. Everybody tipped their hat to it whether they meant it or not. Ethan rode through the open gate and pulled up short in the yard. 3 men stood around a young woman kneeling in the dirt. One held a rifle loose at his side barrel down, still trailing a thread of smoke. Another leaned against the porch post with his arms crossed, grinning the way men grin when they are certain no consequences are coming. The third stood directly in front of the woman with his hands on his hips. He was maybe 55 broad in the chest gray at the temples. Victor Carter. Ethan had seen him at the feed store twice and at the church social once. A man of standing. A man the town called respectable. The woman on the ground was young, no older than 24. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung across one cheek. Both palms were pressed flat in the dirt where she had caught herself from falling. A thin line of blood moved from her left eyebrow down toward her jaw. She was not crying anymore. She was not looking at her father. She was looking at nothing, the way people look when they have gone somewhere inside themselves to survive something outside. Ethan stepped down from his horse. "Morning," he said. Victor Carter turned his head. His expression was the expression of a man interrupted during a private matter, not a man who had any awareness that what he was doing might require explanation. "This is private land, Walker." "It is," Ethan agreed. He looped his reins over the post at the edge of the yard and walked 3 steps closer. "That your daughter, Mr. Carter?" "That is none of your business." "She's bleeding on your property, sir. That makes it a little bit of my business, I reckon." The man with the rifle shifted his weight, not raising it, just reminding Ethan it was there. Ethan glanced at it once and looked back at Victor. "She fell," Victor said. "Yes, sir, I can see she did." Ethan looked down at the woman. She had raised her head now just barely. Her eyes were brown and very still, the stillness of deep water, and they moved to his face with something that was not quite hope and not quite warning. A mixture of both. A plea tangled in caution. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "can you stand?" "She doesn't need your help," Victor said. "I'll let her answer that." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. The man by the post stopped grinning. Victor's jaw set hard. The young woman's eyes moved from Ethan's face to her father's and back again. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady. That steadiness cost her something Ethan could see. It cost her something, but she kept it. "You don't look fine, ma'am. You look like a woman who took a fall that wasn't an accident." Walker. Victor's voice dropped to the register men used when they wanted to sound like the law without being it. "I will tell you one more time. This is a family matter. You will remount your horse and ride on." Ethan did not move. He stood in that yard with the October wind pulling at his coat, and he looked at Victor Carter the way he had once looked at a commanding officer who had ordered him to do something that couldn't be undone, and he felt in his chest the same quiet refusal that had cost him his commission and not a single moment of sleep. "I'll ride on," Ethan said. "When I'm satisfied she doesn't need a doctor." Her name was Abigail. He did not learn it in the yard. He learned it 40 minutes later at the Millhaven doctor's office, where he had insisted she let Doc Harlan look at the cut above her eye. Victor had not followed them into town. That surprised Ethan. Men like Victor Carter did not usually let their property walk away from them without pursuit. But Victor had watched them go from the porch with his arms crossed and said nothing, and that silence bothered Ethan more than a threat would have. Silences like that meant the man wasn't worried. And a man who wasn't worried about losing his daughter to a stranger's interference was a man who believed he'd already won. "Abigail Carter," she said when Doc Harlan asked for her name. Her voice had not changed since the yard. It was still steady, still even. The voice of someone who had practiced living inside a very small, very controlled space for a very long time. "How'd this happen, Miss Carter?" Doc Harlan asked, pressing a clean cloth to her brow. "I slipped," she said. "That so?" "Yes, sir." Doc Harlan glanced at Ethan over her head. Ethan said nothing. Some fights had to be chosen, and that one was hers. When the cut was cleaned and dressed, and they stood outside on the board sidewalk, Abigail turned to him with her hands folded in front of her and her chin up and said, "Thank you for bringing me. I'll find my own way back." "Back to the ranch," Ethan said. "Yes." "To your father." She met his eyes. "He's my father, Mr. Walker, Ethan Walker." He pulled his hat brim down against the sun. "Miss Carter, I watched a man stand over you while you were bleeding in the dirt, and tell me you fell. I don't believe he was lying for your benefit." Something moved through her expression and was gone. "That is not your concern," she said. "You said that already." "Because it's still true." Ethan studied her for a moment. The dress she wore was clean but mended at one sleeve. Her boots were practical, not a woman's vanity boots, the kind worn by someone who spent real hours on real ground. Her hands were not the hands of a woman who sat in parlors. There were calluses at the base of her fingers, the hands of someone who ran a ranch. He thought about the land he had ridden across to reach the Carter property, the fences in good repair, the cattle in good condition, the kitchen garden visible from the road, still producing in October when most gardens had given up. Somebody was running that operation with real skill. He looked at her hands, and he looked at her face, and he thought, this woman is the reason that ranch works and nobody is calling it her name. "Your father have hired men?" Ethan asked. "4. Any of them loyal to you rather than to him?" The pause before she answered was answer enough. "Mr. Walker, I appreciate what you did this morning. It was kind, and I don't have cause to expect kindness from strangers. But I have been managing my situation for a very long time without assistance, and I will continue to do so." "What does managing look like?" Ethan asked. Because from where I stood, it looked like kneeling in the dirt. Her chin went up another degree. "Good day, Mr. Walker." She walked back toward the livery to collect the horse she had apparently left there that morning, before whatever had happened in the yard had happened. She walked with her back straight and her hands still folded, and she did not look back. Ethan stood on the sidewalk and watched her go and told himself he was done with it. He was not done with it. He bought his feed. He drank his coffee. Ruth Dunbar was not in one of her moods and talked at him for 20 minutes about her sister's new grandchildren, and Ethan nodded at the right intervals and tasted nothing. He rode back up toward his homestead on the North Ridge. He got halfway there. Then he turned back. He told himself he was being foolish. He told himself it was none of his business, the way the woman herself had told him twice. He told himself he had his own land and his own troubles, and a man in his 35th year on this earth with no family and no prospects, and nothing but a ridge full of good pines, had no standing to walk into somebody else's war. He told himself all of it. He rode back anyway. He did not go to the Carter Ranch this time. He went to the Mill Haven Recorder, the small newspaper office on Prentice Street where a man named Clay Adler had been printing the county news since before Montana was a territory. Clay was old and ink-stained and knew every family for 40 miles in any direction and was generally considered to be the county's memory. "Victor Carter," Ethan said, settling into the chair across from Clay's desk. "Tell me what you know." Clay looked at him over his spectacles. "You buying information or trading it? I got nothing to trade. I'll owe you one." Clay leaned back. "Victor Carter. Come up from Missouri in '52. Built that ranch from nothing, I'll give him that. Had a wife, Eleanor. She died when Abigail was 9. Fever." He paused. "After Eleanor died, that ranch should have failed. Victor had the land and the cattle, but never the head for the details. Abigail started keeping the books at 11. I know that because Eleanor's sister, who lives in Bozeman, wrote me a letter about it once. Said the child was doing a grown man's work and nobody was saying thank you." He picked up a pen and turned it in his fingers. "Victor's been talking to Jeremiah Blackwell about a marriage arrangement for close on 6 months now." Ethan went still. "Blackwell. You know him. Reputation. 2 dead wives." "3 dead wives," Clay said quietly. "The third one down in New Mexico, I had it from a man who came through last spring. They called it illness, but she was 22 years old and healthy at the wedding." "Does Carter know that—" Clay set down the pen. "Ethan, Victor Carter is not a stupid man. He knows." The room was very quiet. "What does Blackwell get out of it?" Ethan asked. "The Carter land borders Blackwell's north pasture. Together it would be the biggest single holding in the county. Bigger than anything the railroad's been buying up." Clay folded his hands. "Victor gets $40,000 in a retirement. Abigail gets a husband. Nobody asked her opinion. They set a date. I heard 10 days, maybe less. Blackwell's been pushing for a quick ceremony." 10 days. Ethan stood up. He put on his hat. He was 3 steps toward the door when Clay's voice stopped him. "Walker." The old man had not moved from his chair. He was looking at Ethan with an expression that held something between admiration and genuine worry. "Victor Carter has friends on the town council. The sheriff's a practical man who knows which way his bread is buttered. And Jeremiah Blackwell has more money than God and less conscience than the devil." He paused. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, think about it twice." Ethan put his hand on the doorframe. "I appreciate the warning," he said. "Are you going to take it?" A long moment. "No," Ethan said. "I don't reckon I am." He rode back to the Carter Ranch in the late afternoon when the light came low and gold across the grass and the shadows of the fence posts stretched long toward the east. He did not ride in through the gate this time. He stopped at the fence line where the property met the county road, and he sat his horse there and watched the place the way a man watches something he is trying to understand. He saw Abigail cross the yard from the barn to the house. She was carrying a ledger under one arm and a lantern that wasn't lit yet in the other hand. She walked fast, economical, no wasted movement. At the porch steps, she paused and looked south at the sky, checking the weather the way ranchers did, and for a moment her face was turned toward the road, and he could see her in profile against the fading light. She had cleaned the blood from her face and repinned her hair. The white bandage at her brow was the only sign of what the morning had been. From this distance, she looked composed, contained, entirely in control of a situation that was systematically destroying her. One of the hired men came out of the barn and said something Ethan couldn't hear. Abigail nodded without looking at him and went inside. The door closed. The lamp came on in the window. Ethan sat there until the stars started, and then he turned his horse back toward the road. 10 days. He had 10 days to do something he didn't yet know how to do, for a woman who hadn't asked him for anything, and probably wouldn't. For a woman who had survived so long by trusting no one that she had turned self-sufficiency into armor so thick she couldn't tell the difference anymore between protection and prison. He understood that. He understood it in a way he didn't like to examine too closely. He rode north in the dark and the cold, and the first thin scent of snow was already in the wind. Winter coming early, as it often did in Montana. And Ethan Walker thought about a woman's steady voice, and a woman's careful eyes, and a line of blood on her face that nobody had apologized for. He thought about Clay Adler saying 3 dead wives. He thought about 10 days. He turned up the collar of his coat and rode harder. He was not riding away. Ethan was back at the Carter fence line before sunrise. He had not slept well. He had lain on his bunk in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about 10 days until the number stopped feeling like time and started feeling like a countdown to something irreversible. At 4 in the morning, he stopped pretending sleep was coming, pulled on his boots, and rode south. He did not have a plan. That bothered him. He was a man who believed in plans, in measured steps, in knowing the ground before he put weight on it. 3 years in the cavalry had burned that into him down to the bone. You did not ride into unknown terrain without intelligence. You did not engage without knowing your enemy's position, his numbers, his supply lines. He knew almost nothing about Victor Carter's position except that it was strong, well-funded, and had the sheriff's practical cooperation. He knew almost nothing about Jeremiah Blackwell except 3 dead wives and $40,000 and a hunger for land that seemed to have no bottom. And he knew one woman with calloused hands and steady eyes who had told him twice that none of this was his business. He was still there when she came out of the house at first light. She saw him immediately. He was not trying to hide. She stood on the porch and looked across the yard to the fence line, and when she recognized him, her expression did not change, which told him she had expected him or something like him, or had at least not ruled it out. She came to the fence. She did not rush. She walked with the same economical stride he had noted the day before, and she stopped 2 feet from the rails and looked up at him on the horse and said, "You came back." "I did. I told you this wasn't your concern." "You did," Ethan agreed. "I've been thinking about that. And I've decided you're wrong." She stared at him. It was the stare of a woman who had not been contradicted plainly in some time and was not sure how to receive it. Not angry, not softened. Something more complicated than either. "Mr. Walker," she said carefully, "my father is awake by 6. If he sees you at this fence, he will take it as provocation, and someone will get hurt. Probably you." "Probably," Ethan said. "Miss Carter, how long have you been running that ranch?" The question caught her off balance. "That's not—" "How long?" A pause. 15 years, since my mother died." "And in 15 years, have you ever had a single season where the operation failed?" She said nothing. "The fences I rode past yesterday were tight," he said. "The cattle I saw were healthy. That kitchen garden is still producing in October. Somebody with real skill has been managing this land for a long time. I don't think it was your father." Her jaw tightened. "What is your point?" "My point is that your father is about to sell you to a man who has buried 3 wives, and the reason he can do it is because you have spent 15 years making his ranch valuable enough that somebody wants to buy it. You built the thing that's being used to trap you." The silence that followed was not the silence of someone with nothing to say. It was the silence of someone with too much to say, and too much practice saying nothing. "I'm aware of my situation," she said finally. "Jeremiah Blackwell," Ethan said. "You know about the wives?" Something shifted in her face, not surprise, something closer to confirmation of a fear she had already been living with. "I know about 2. There were 3, the last one in New Mexico. She was 22. Abigail's hands, which had been resting on the top fence rail, pressed down harder. He watched her knuckles pale. "Who told you that?" "Clay Adler." "Clay Adler is a gossip." "Clay Adler is the county's memory," Ethan said. "And he told me your father knows, about all 3. The sound she made was barely a sound at all. something between a breath and a word that never finished forming. She looked away from him toward the east, where the sky was going pink above the hills, and the light was coming up cold and clean. 10 days, Ethan said quietly. 8, she said. They moved it. 8 days. 2 less than he'd had an hour ago. Tell me what you need, he said. She turned back to him. Her eyes were dry. He respected that, not because tears were weakness, but because the decision to hold them back in that moment was its own kind of strength. What I need, she said, is for my father to be a different man than he is. Can you arrange that, Mr. Walker? No. Then I don't know what you can give me that's worth the trouble it will cost you. Let me worry about the cost, he said. You worry about the 8 days. She studied him for a long moment in the early light, and he let her look, because a woman in her position had earned the right to study the people who claimed they wanted to help her. Why? She asked finally, not hostile, genuinely asking. You don't know me. You have no obligation here. Why does a stranger ride back to a fence line before sunrise for a woman who told him twice to leave? Ethan was quiet for a moment. Because I heard that scream, he said, and I recognized it. She waited. My mother made that sound, he said. Once. When I was 11. I didn't understand it then the way I understand it now. But I remember it. He adjusted his hat brim. And I rode away from it. I was 11 and I didn't know what else to do, and I have been riding away from that sound ever since. I don't intend to do it again. Abigail Carter looked at him for a very long time. Then she said, There is a back gate, north side of the property past the second creek. If you're going to be at a fence line, be at that one. My father doesn't ride that way. She turned and walked back to the house without another word. Ethan let out a slow breath and turned his horse north. It was the most she had given him, and he knew it. He spent the morning at Clay Adler's office with a pot of bad coffee between them, and every scrap of paper Clay had on Victor Carter and Jeremiah Blackwell spread across the desk. Property records, tax filings. The brief item Clay had printed 2 years ago when Blackwell bought the Hennessy spread to his east. A letter from the New Mexico correspondent carefully preserved that described the third wife's death in terms that never quite said murder, but never quite didn't. The marriage contract, Ethan said, turning a page. Is it registered anywhere? Not yet. Victor's been keeping it private. I think he knows how it looks. Clay refilled his cup. Once it's filed with the county clerk, it becomes a matter of record. If Abigail were to contest it before that point. She's of age, Ethan said. She can't be forced into a legal marriage. Not legally, no. Clay's voice was dry as chalk. But a woman whose father controls her housing, her food, her access to money, her ability to leave the property. He stopped. Legal and practical are different countries, son. Ethan knew that. He had learned it the hard way in a different context a long time ago. What does she have that's hers? Ethan asked. Not her father's. Legally hers. Clay hesitated. That hesitation told Ethan everything before the words did. Eleanor Carter, Clay said slowly, had property of her own when she married Victor. Family land in Missouri. She converted it to cash when they came west, and that cash went into building the ranch. But Eleanor's will... He stood up and moved to the cabinet at the back of the room, pulling open the lower drawer. I have a copy of Eleanor's will because I witnessed it. She left it here for safekeeping. Victor doesn't know I have it. He set a folded document on the desk between them. Ethan did not touch it. He looked at Clay. Eleanor left the original cash value of her Missouri property. Clay said to Abigail, in trust, to be released to Abigail on her 25th birthday, or upon her marriage, whichever came first. He paused. The amount in $1862 was $11,000. That's a significant sum. It's more than significant. It's independence. Clay sat back down. Victor has never told Abigail it exists. The room was very still. Does Abigail know her mother left a will? Ethan asked. I don't know what Abigail knows. I know Victor was present at the signing and witnessed it himself. He looked at the document. And I know that if Abigail marries Jeremiah Blackwell before her 25th birthday, that money becomes accessible under the marriage clause, which means it stops being Abigail's and starts being her husband's. Ethan picked up the document. How old is she now? He asked, though something in his chest already suspected the answer. 24, Clay said. She turns 25 in November. November, 6 weeks away. And the wedding was set for 8 days from now. Victor Carter was not selling his daughter to Blackwell for $40,000. He was selling her for $40,000 plus $11,000 of Eleanor's money that Abigail would never see, plus 400 acres that bordered the most land-hungry man in the county. He was selling everything. I need to borrow this, Ethan said. Clay nodded once. I was hoping you'd say that. He rode to the north fence line at midday and found Abigail already there. A ledger open on the top rail, her pencil moving in quick, tight columns. She did not look up when she heard him coming. You've been busy, she said. I have. He dismounted and came to stand at the fence. Your mother left a will. The pencil stopped. Clay Adler has a copy. Eleanor Carter left you the cash value of her Missouri property, $11,000 in trust. Accessible when you turn 25 or when you marry. Abigail did not move. Your father has known since the day it was signed. She set the pencil down on the ledger very carefully. The deliberateness of it, the precision with which she placed that small object, told him more about what she was feeling than anything her face was doing. He never told you, Ethan said. No, she said, very quietly. He never told me. If you marry Blackwell before November, the money becomes accessible under the marriage clause. Your father gets his $40,000. Blackwell gets the land and the legal access to your inheritance. And you? Get nothing, she said. Her voice was still quiet, the kind of quiet that had a pressure behind it, the quiet of water before it finds a crack in stone. Get nothing and no one to tell. That's not entirely true, Ethan said. You have Clay, you have the will, and you have 8 days to use both. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry still, that same controlled stillness, but something behind them had shifted. Something that had been compressed for a very long time was beginning slowly and carefully to expand. What are you suggesting? She asked. I'm suggesting that a woman who has been running a 400-acre ranch since she was 9 years old knows more about the operation of that property than any court in Montana would hand to a man who's been drawing on her labor for 15 years without acknowledgement. He met her eyes. I'm suggesting that the will presented to the right judge in Billings before that contract is filed changes the entire picture. My father will find out I've been talking to you. He probably already suspects. If he finds out, she stopped. Miss Carter, what will he do that he isn't already doing? The silence stretched between them, and Ethan watched her work through it, watched her turn the question in her mind and measure it against everything she knew, which was more than he knew, and he waited. He has 4 hired men, she said. I told you. I know. One of them, Tom Aldridge, has been with us since before my mother died. He's loyal to the land, not to my father. Not to me either. Just to the work. She paused. He doesn't know about Blackwell, about the plan. If he did. Tom has a daughter of his own, she said. In Billings. They looked at each other across the fence rail. Tell me what else you need, Ethan said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her pencil and looked down at the ledger and said, Come back at the same time tomorrow. I'll have answers. All right. He was putting his foot in the stirrup when she said without looking up, Mr. Walker? He stopped. My mother's name was Eleanor, she said. She used to tell me that a woman who knows the numbers knows the truth. She taught me to keep books when I was 6. A pause. I have kept every ledger for this ranch for 15 years. I know exactly what this land is worth. I know exactly what my father is selling, and for how much, and I know it is not enough, not nearly enough for what he is taking. She was still looking at the ledger. "I want you to know that I know." Ethan settled back into the saddle. "I know you know," he said. She nodded once, the smallest acknowledgement, and he rode away, and left her to the numbers she had always been the only one to trust. Victor Carter found out about Ethan Walker's second visit at supper time, which meant one of the 4 hired men was reporting back, and Ethan had assumed as much. What he had not assumed was how quickly Victor would move. He came home to his ridge that evening and found 2 men at his gate, not strangers. He recognized the one on the left as Dale Pruitt, who worked for Blackwell's operation and had a reputation for the kind of work that didn't get written down. The one on the right he didn't know, younger, less patient in his posture. "Evening," Ethan said, keeping his horse at a walk. "Mr. Blackwell asks that you give the Carter situation your absence," Dale Pruitt said. He had a way of speaking that sounded almost polite and wasn't. "He says whatever your interest is, it ain't worth the inconvenience of pursuing it." "Mr. Blackwell's asking me to stay off county roads," Ethan said. "He's asking you to reconsider your recent habits." "That's a kind way to put a threat." Pruitt smiled. "No threat, Mr. Walker. A professional courtesy." Ethan looked at them both for a long moment. 2 men, armed, positioned between him and his own gate. He thought about the cavalry. He thought about unknown terrain and known responses and the specific calculus of a man who has been told to stand down and is deciding whether to comply. "Tell Mr. Blackwell," Ethan said, "that I appreciate the courtesy." He did not move. Pruitt waited. "And then tell him," Ethan continued in exactly the same tone, "that I've got more experience than him at holding ground and significantly less to lose. And that I've been politely asked to leave situations worse than this one, and I didn't do it then either." He walked his horse forward directly toward the 2 men. Not fast, not aggressive, just forward steady the way a man walks through a room he has already decided belongs to him. After a moment, Pruitt stepped aside. Ethan rode through his own gate and didn't look back, but he slept with his rifle across the chair that night, and he kept the window cracked, and he listened to the dark for sounds that shouldn't be there. And sometime after midnight, he heard horses on the south road, and counted them 3 moving east, and thought about Abigail Carter, alone in that house with 4 hired men, one of whom was reporting her movements to her father, and none of whom were between her and whatever was coming. 8 days had become 7. He was running out of patience for careful. God, she was already at the north fence when he arrived the next morning, and she had not come alone. The man with her was 60, or close to it, wide in the shoulder, with the particular weathered stillness of someone who had spent 4 decades doing hard work and expected to spend the next 4 doing the same. He stood 3 feet behind Abigail with his hat in his hands and looked at Ethan with the cautious assessment of a man evaluating whether to trust a stranger with something important. "Tom Aldridge," Abigail said. "He knows." Ethan stepped down. He extended his hand, and Aldridge looked at it for a moment before shaking it the handshake of a man who was still deciding. "She told me about Blackwell's wives," Aldridge said. "The third one. Clay Adler had it from a New Mexico source, man who came through last spring. I knew a man down there once." Aldridge looked at the ground and then back up. "Girl Blackwell married last, her name was Clara, 22 years old and healthy at the wedding. She was dead before the first snow." He paused. "Victor Carter doesn't care about that. I've worked this land for 27 years, and I'm telling you plainly he knows what kind of man Blackwell is, and it does not change his arithmetic." "No," Ethan agreed. "It doesn't." "Then what changes it?" Ethan looked at Abigail. "The will changes it. The will and the ledgers." Aldridge frowned. "The ledgers. 15 years of operational records in Abigail's hand," Ethan said. 15 years of every decision, every purchase, every breeding record, every harvest yield. If those records go before a judge in Billings alongside Eleanor Carter's will, and a claim that Abigail has been functioning as the de facto manager of this property without legal recognition. He stopped. It doesn't dissolve the father's legal authority, but it creates a case. It creates the kind of case that requires hearings and delays and public attention that Victor Carter and Jeremiah Blackwell would both prefer to avoid. "You're talking about making noise," Aldridge said. "I'm talking about making enough noise that the whole county hears it." Victor will. Victor will what? Abigail's voice cut in, and there was something new in it. Something that had not been there the day before. Not loudness. Something sharper than loudness. The sound of a woman who has spent the night sitting with what she has learned and has come out the other side of it, changed. "He'll be angry. He'll punish me. He'll call me ungrateful. He's already given me to a man who kills wives, Tom. What exactly is left to threaten me with?" Aldridge was quiet. "I need the ledgers out of the ranch house," she said. "All of them. 15 years. They're in the office cabinet, bottom 2 drawers. I need them out before my father realizes what they're worth as evidence, because once he does, they'll disappear. If I help you do that, then you helped me protect 15 years of your work too," she said. "Because every record of every decision that made this land what it is today has your name in it too, Tom. Your judgment. Your labor." She looked at him steadily. "I am not the only one Victor Carter has been erasing." Aldridge put his hat back on. He looked at Ethan. "Can you get those records to Billings safely? I know a man who can carry them, and know enough not to say who asked." "How long before you need them?" 5 days at the outside," Ethan said. "Ideally 4. Aldridge nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man who is stepping off solid ground into moving water and has calculated that staying on the bank is worse. "Tonight," he said. "After Victor goes to his bottle, which he does by 9. I'll have them at the back gate by 10. He looked at Abigail one more time with the expression of a man who had watched her grow up and was watching her do something her mother would have recognized. Then he turned and walked back toward the ranch without another word. Ethan and Abigail stood at the fence in the morning light and did not speak for a moment. "You said he drinks," Ethan said. "Every night since my mother died," she said. "He starts at dinner, and by 9 he's in the study, and by 10 he's asleep in the chair." She paused. "It's the only predictable thing about him." "It's enough," Ethan said. She looked at him. The sharpness in her voice from a moment ago had not left, but something beside it had softened marginally the way a door softens when the wood is warmed. "Why do you keep saying that?" she asked. "Saying what?" "It's enough." "You know." "Let me worry about the cost." She studied him. "You say it like you already know how this ends." "I don't," Ethan said honestly. "But I know what happens when you stop trying because the odds look bad. I've seen it end both ways, and I know which ending I can live with." She was quiet. "Can you?" he asked, not unkindly. The question sat between them, and she let it sit, which was its own kind of answer. "I'll be at the back gate at 10, she said. She went back across the yard toward the house, and Ethan watched her go. Same walk as always, same straight back and quick step. And he thought about a woman who had been keeping books since she was 6 years old, because her mother told her the truth lived in numbers. He thought about how much truth she must have been carrying all alone. And he thought about Jeremiah Blackwell's 3 dead wives and Dale Pruitt at his gate, and a sheriff who knew which way his bread was buttered, and a man in a study going to sleep in a chair every night at 10. And he thought that what was coming was not going to be solved at fence lines with careful words and borrowed documents. What was coming was going to require something louder. He just needed 4 more days to build it. Tom Aldridge was at the back gate at 10 o'clock exactly, which told Ethan everything he needed to know about the man's character. Not 9:58, not 10 after, 10. A man who set a time and meant it was a man who could be trusted with more than ledgers. There were 2 crates. Ethan had expected 1. He looked at Aldridge in the dark, and Aldridge said without preamble, 15 years is more paper than you think. He handed the first crate across the fence, and Ethan loaded it onto the pack horse he'd brought for the purpose. She's inside. Victor went to the chair at 9:15. Earlier than usual. He had more to drink at dinner than he normally does. Why more than usual? Aldridge was quiet for a moment. Blackwell came for supper. They finalized something. I don't know what. But when Blackwell left, Victor poured himself 3 fingers instead of 2 and didn't say a word to anyone the rest of the night. Ethan loaded the second crate and secured both. Did Blackwell see Abigail? She served the meal. Aldridge's jaw tightened in the dark, just barely the smallest movement. He watched her the whole time, didn't speak to her directly, just watched. He paused. She kept her face like stone. I don't know how. Ethan did know how. He had watched her do it twice already at the fence line. The same way men kept their faces in the moment before a charge, not by feeling nothing, but by refusing to let what they felt be seen by the enemy. The records go to Clay Adler tonight, Ethan said. He'll have his contact in Billings, move them to Judge Hargrove's office by Thursday at the latest. Is there anything in those ledgers that's unfavorable to Abigail's case? Not a line, Aldridge said flatly. Every entry is honest. Every figure is real. That's the thing about Abigail's books. She never once cooked a number for her father's pride. She kept them true, even when the truth wasn't pretty. He looked at Ethan steadily. Victor doesn't know what's in them. He never looked. He just knew the ranch worked and let her manage it, and didn't ask questions, because the answers would have required him to give her credit. Ethan thought about that on the ride back, a man who had benefited from 15 years of someone's expertise, and never once looked closely enough to understand what he was benefiting from. It was a particular kind of arrogance, the arrogance that didn't even bother to be aware of itself. He left the crates with Clay Adler at 11:30 and rode home in the dark and slept better than he had in 3 nights. The trouble started the next morning before he reached the north fence. He was half a mile out when he saw the smoke. Not a large fire, not a building fire. The thin, deliberate smoke of burning paper coming from the direction of the ranch yard. He pushed his horse faster and came over the low rise and saw Victor Carter standing in the yard with a metal barrel and a lantern feeding something into the flames. Abigail was on the porch, standing still, watching. Ethan pulled up at the fence line and looked at what was burning. Paper, ledger pages. But not the ledgers were safe with Clay. This was something else. Letters, maybe. Personal documents. Victor looked up and saw him, and his expression did something complicated. Not surprise, not rage, something colder than both. Satisfaction. The expression of a man who believed he was 3 moves ahead. I know you were at the back gate last night, Walker. Victor called across the yard. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant. The pleasantness of someone who doesn't need to raise his voice because he has already won. I know you took something off my property. Ethan said nothing. What you took doesn't matter, Victor said. He fed another handful of paper into the barrel. You can't prove what's already gone. And there's not a judge in Montana who's going to take the word of a ridge hermit over mine. He looked up again. Go home. Ethan looked at Abigail. She was looking at him. Her face was stone the way Aldridge had described, but her eyes were moving in a way that stone didn't rapidly, deliberately the eyes of someone communicating something they couldn't say aloud. He looked at what Victor was burning again, and then he understood. The letters. The letters from Eleanor's sister in Bozeman. The ones Clay had mentioned. The ones that documented Abigail keeping books at 11, doing a grown man's work, the paper trail of a life that proved her competence, and proved her father's knowledge of it. Victor had figured out what was valuable. Not the operational ledgers, those were already gone, and he probably didn't know it yet, but the personal record. The letters that corroborated the story Abigail would tell in any legal proceeding. He was burning the witnesses. Ethan's hands were tight on the reins. He did not go through the gate. Not today. Today was not the day for that confrontation, not without the documents already safe in Billings, not without a clearer picture of what Victor and Blackwell had finalized over supper last night. He held Abigail's gaze for 3 seconds and tipped his hat, once deliberate, and turned his horse south toward town. Behind him, he heard Victor say something to her that he couldn't make out, and he heard her say nothing back, and that silence followed him all the way to Millhaven. Clay Adler was already at his desk when Ethan walked in, which meant Clay had not slept either, and the expression on the old man's face confirmed that the night had produced something worth losing sleep over. Sit down, Clay said. Ethan sat. I sent the ledgers with Thomas Pryor on the 4 a.m. stage, Clay said. They'll be in Billings by tonight. Judge Hargrove is a fair man, and he owes me a professional favor I've been holding for 6 years." He paused. "That's the good news. What's the other news?" "Blackwell filed an intent with the county clerk yesterday evening, after supper." Clay turned a paper on his desk. "It's not the marriage contract itself, but it's a formal declaration of intent to contract. Once that's filed, it creates a legal presumption in favor of completion." He looked at Ethan. "It also means that any challenge to the arrangement now goes through the county clerk's office before it reaches a judge, and the county clerk is Harlan Fitch, who reports to the town council." "Who are Victor Carter's friends?" Clay said. "Yes." Ethan sat back in the chair. "How much time does the filing buy them?" "It doesn't reduce the 8-day window, but it means that if we go to file a counterclaim on Abigail's behalf, the will the management records the inheritance claim, Fitch has the procedural authority to delay processing it for up to 5 business days." Clay spread his hands. "Which eats the window entirely. So we can't go through the county clerk." "No. We go directly to Billings." "Which means Abigail has to go to Billings," Clay said. "In person. A judge won't hear a claim without the claimant present, and to get to Billings, she has to leave the ranch, which her father will not permit, and stay gone for at least 2 days, which requires money she doesn't have access to, and transport her father controls." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She has $11,000 in trust," he said, "that she can't access without the judge's order releasing it, which is what we're trying to get." Clay looked at him over his spectacles with the expression of a man who has spent 50 years watching people navigate circular problems. "You see the difficulty." Ethan saw it clearly. The whole thing was designed that way, not by genius, but by the accumulated weight of systems built to keep women exactly where Victor Carter needed them. Not malice exactly. Mechanics. The machinery of a world that had never needed to ask permission from the people it was grinding. "There's a way," Ethan said slowly. "I'm listening." "Eleanor Carter's will. The original, not Clay's copy. Where's it filed?" Clay frowned. "I witnessed it, but I don't know where Eleanor filed the original. She would have—" He stopped. His eyes changed. "She would have given it to her sister, in Bozeman." "Get me the sister's address." "Ethan, the sister's letter is in the burn barrel at the Carter Ranch right now," Ethan said. "Or ash already. Victor's been burning the corroborating documents this morning. He knows about the letters, but he can't burn what's in Bozeman." He stood up. "The original will in the sister's possession presented directly to Hargrove by Abigail Carter in person bypasses Fitch entirely. No county clerk. No procedural delay. Straight to the judge." Clay was already on his feet, moving to the file cabinet. "The address," Ethan said. "Give me 2 minutes." Say, he did not tell Abigail about Bozeman at the north fence that afternoon. He did not tell her at all that day, because when he arrived at the fence line, she was not alone. One of the hired men, not Aldridge, a younger one, with a flat expression and no particular warmth, was standing 20 feet behind her, not working, just standing. Watching her. Watching the fence line. Watching Ethan. She had told him Victor would respond to Ethan's continued presence as provocation. This was the response. Not violence. Not yet. Surveillance. The strategy of a man who wanted to demonstrate to his daughter that she had no move that wasn't observed. Ethan nodded to her from horseback, as if he were any neighbor passing the property, and she nodded back with the precise courtesy of a woman performing normalcy for an audience, and he rode on. But as he passed the northwest corner of the fence, the point farthest from the hired man, and closest to the stand of cottonwoods that blocked the line of sight from the ranch yard, he slowed his horse to a walk, and without looking toward the fence, in a voice just loud enough to carry the 12 feet between them, he said, "North Cottonwoods, 1 hour." He did not hear her respond. He did not look back. He rode to the cottonwoods, and he waited. She came in 45 minutes on foot, from the direction of the creek, having taken the long way around the property boundary. She was breathing slightly harder than usual, and her boots were wet to the ankle from the creek crossing, but her face was the composed face she always wore in the open, the face she had perfected for audiences. When she was close enough that no one 50 yards away could see the words leave her mouth, she said, "He's had Crane following me since this morning. Crane is the new hire, loyal to Blackwell's money, not to us." "I know," Ethan said. "I saw. He knows about the back gate. He told my father last night. That's how—" She stopped, refocused. "What did you need to tell me?" "Your mother's original will," Ethan said. "Does your father ever mention your mother's sister, a woman in Bozeman?" Something crossed her face. A different kind of pain from the kind he usually saw there. Softer. Older. "Aunt Ruth, I haven't seen her since I was 10. My father stopped the correspondence. "Did you know she kept writing to Clay Adler?" Abigail went very still. "For years," Ethan said. "Reporting on you. Worried about you. Your father burned her letters this morning, which means he knew they existed. Which means someone told him." He paused. "Miss Carter, your Aunt Ruth has the original of your mother's will. If we can get you to Bozeman and in front of Judge Hargrove with that document—" "Bozeman," she said. "That's 2 days of travel." "Yes." "My father controls the horses, the wagon, the money. I have a horse," Ethan said. "I have enough money for the stage, and I have a reason to go to Bozeman that has nothing to do with you publicly, which means if I'm seen leaving with you, my father declares me a runaway and sends Blackwell's men after us, and we don't make Bozeman. We make a story that ends my claim before it begins." Her voice was level rapid, the voice of someone thinking through a problem in real time. Not panicking, calculating. "The same road, the same stage. We can't both be on it." "No," Ethan agreed. "But you can be on the eastbound stage at 4 in the morning, which doesn't come through Millhaven, and I can be in Bozeman already having left tonight on a different road." She looked at him. "Tom Aldridge can get you to the Eastern Way Station," Ethan said. 12 miles. He can do it quietly in the dark and be back before the morning count. "If my father discovers Tom helped me, if your father marries you to Jeremiah Blackwell," Ethan said, steady and quiet. "Tom Aldridge knows what happens to you. He has a daughter, Abigail. He knows." He had used her first name without thinking. It landed between them, and he did not apologize for it, and she did not correct him, and there was a moment brief and complete where the formality between them thinned to almost nothing, and they stood in it without speaking. "2 nights in Bozeman," she said finally. "Without my father knowing where I am. At the most. He'll send men. He'll send them to the roads he knows, not the Eastern Way Station." She was quiet. She was doing the calculation he had watched her do every day at the fence line, the same rigorous accounting she had applied to 15 years of ranch operations, the same unflinching arithmetic risk on one side, cost of inaction on the other. "What happens," she said carefully, "if we get to Hargrove and he says no? Then you're in Bozeman without legal protection, and your father has 7 reasons to be furious," Ethan said honestly. "I won't tell you the risk is small." "Don't do that," she said sharply. "Don't soften it. I need to know the real number." He held her gaze. "If Hargrove says no, you go back, and you have nothing left except time. And you are out of time." He paused. "But Hargrove is a fair judge, and Clay has been holding a favor for 6 years, and the will is real, and your ledgers are real, and your competence is documented in your own hand across 15 years. The case is strong, Abigail. It is genuinely strong." She absorbed this. Then she said, if we do this, and it works. If Hargrove releases the trust, and I have the legal claim to my mother's inheritance, and the court record establishes my role in managing the property." She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before, something more fragile than the usual composure and more real than anything the composure had ever shown him. "What happens to the ranch? To Tom? To the hired men who had nothing to do with my father's decisions?" He understood the question. She was not asking about herself. She was asking about the people and the land she had been responsible for since she was 9 years old. Even here, Even now, even standing in borrowed time in a stand of cottonwoods while a hired man watched her fence line, she was thinking about what she owed to the thing she had built. "The land is your father's," Ethan said. "The court can't take that. But the inheritance is yours, and your competence is documented, and that documentation creates the legal foundation for a management agreement that your father cannot simply revoke. It's not everything, but it is ground to stand on." She nodded slowly. "Tell Tom tonight," she said. "Eastern Way Station, 4 a.m. stage." She straightened her back, and the composure came back precise and deliberate, like a woman putting on the coat she needed to wear in public. "I'll be there." Victor Carter found out his daughter was gone at 6:15 the following morning. Ethan knew the exact time, because Dale Pruitt arrived at his ridgeline at 6:45, which meant the word had traveled fast, and the decision to come straight at him had been made without hesitation. This time Pruitt had not brought one man. He had brought three. They came into the yard, and Pruitt did not bother with the professional courtesy of the previous visit. He pulled his horse up hard and looked at Ethan standing on the porch and said, "Where is she?" "Good morning, Dale," Ethan said. "I'm not here to exchange pleasantries. Where is Abigail Carter?" "I haven't seen Miss Carter since yesterday," Ethan said. "You're welcome to check my property if you think I'm lying." "We will." "Go ahead." They went through this cabin and the barn and the outbuildings and found nothing because there was nothing to find. Abigail was on a stage 70 miles east, and Ethan had not watched her go and could not be said to know where she was going because he had not officially been told. When Pruitt came back out of the barn, his expression had the tight, controlled quality of a man recalculating. "Her father is going to file a missing person complaint with the sheriff," Pruitt said. "That is his right," Ethan said. "She's a young woman traveling alone in Montana Territory in November. Something happens to her that's on whoever helped her leave." Ethan looked at Pruitt without expression. "A grown woman of 24 making her own travel arrangements is not a missing person. She is a person who has left." He paused. "Unless Victor Carter believes his daughter requires his permission to use a public road." Pruitt stared at him. The stare of a man who knows he has lost the argument and is considering whether to escalate beyond argument. Ethan did not move, did not shift his weight, did not change his expression. He had stood in places considerably more dangerous than his own porch, and he had learned a long time ago that stillness, genuine stillness, was harder for a hostile man to read than aggression. Aggression told you where the line was. Stillness told you nothing at all. Pruitt turned his horse. "This isn't finished, Walker." "No," Ethan agreed. "It isn't." Nan, the sheriff came that afternoon. Ethan had expected that too. Sheriff Cord Mackey was a practical man, as Clay had said, and practical men in small counties with strong landowners learned to walk carefully between what was legal and what was expedient. He came without deputies, which told Ethan the visit was meant to be a conversation rather than an arrest, and he sat across the table in Ethan's cabin and drank the coffee Ethan offered him, and held the cup in both hands and looked at the table. "Victor Carter says his daughter has been taken," Mackey said. "What do you say?" Ethan asked. Mackey looked up. "I say I have a missing woman and a formal complaint from her father and a known associate of hers who has been seen at the property fence line 5 times in the past week." He set down the cup. "And I say that I have personally known Abigail Carter since she was 12 years old, and I have also personally known what her father is arranging to do with her, and I am sitting in your kitchen instead of arresting you, because I am trying to work out which side of this I want to be on when it's finished." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She's safe," he said. "That's all I'll tell you." Mackey studied him. "Is she in the territory?" "She's safe." Ethan. It was the first time the sheriff had used his first name. It changed the tone of the room. "Victor Carter is going to Blackwell's tonight. I know what Blackwell's men are capable of. If this goes wrong, if it gets violent, then it gets violent," Ethan said. "And the county will have to decide who it's standing with when that happens." Mackey pushed back from the table and stood up and put on his hat and stood at the door for a moment, looking out at the yard. "I have a daughter," he said quietly. 18. Good girl. Ethan waited. I hope you know what you're doing, Walker. I hope so too, Ethan said honestly. Mackie rode away, and Ethan stood in the doorway and watched him go and counted the hours in his head. Abigail would reach Bozeman by tomorrow morning. He had left the address with Clay, and Clay had sent a telegram to Ruth that morning, careful coded enough to tell a woman who had been waiting 14 years to hear from her niece that help was coming. He had to believe Ruth was still at that address. He had to believe the will was intact. He had to believe Judge Hargrove was the kind of fare that survived pressure from men like Blackwell. He was operating on 3 significant assumptions and very little time, and a woman he had known for 5 days who had more courage in her calculated silences than most men he had known had in their loudest moments. The fire started at midnight, not on his property. On the road below his ridge, a wagon set ablaze positioned across the only road down from the north slope. Not an accident, not a cooking fire gone wrong. The wagon had been placed there deliberately burning brightly enough to be seen from his porch. And the message was clear. You are cut off. You cannot move quickly. You cannot reach town tonight. Ethan stood on the porch and looked at the fire, and thought about what required him to reach town tonight. Nothing. Abigail was already on the stage. The ledgers were in Billings. Clay had the address. Ruth had the telegram. Blackwell was cutting off roads that were already empty. He was working from the wrong map. Ethan almost felt something like amusement. Almost. Then he thought about what a man desperate enough to burn a wagon on a county road might do next, and the amusement went away. He thought about Tom Aldridge back at the ranch having made his choice. He thought about Abigail on the stage in the dark alone, carrying 15 years of careful arithmetic toward a judge who owed an old newspaper man a favor. He thought about a woman who had told him twice this wasn't his concern. He went inside and loaded his rifle, and sat in the chair by the window, and waited for whatever came next off that dark road, and he thought that there were worse things to be than a man who had stopped riding away. There were much worse things, but the night was long, and Blackwell's patience was running out, and somewhere out there on a road that was not the one that mattered, Dale Pruitt was sitting in front of a fire that had not stopped anything at all, and beginning to understand that the fight had moved somewhere he wasn't watching. The burned wagon was still smoldering when Ethan rode past it at 4 a.m. He had waited in the chair by the window until 2, until the road below stayed quiet, and no more hoofbeats came up the ridge, and then he had made a decision that surprised even himself. Not to sit and wait for Blackwell's next move, not to hold the ridge and defend the ground he already had. To go forward. Into Millhaven. Into the middle of whatever Victor Carter and Jeremiah Blackwell were building before they finished building it. He guided his horse around the burned wreckage without slowing, and rode south in the cold dark, and thought about the timeline. Abigail would reach Bozeman on the morning stage. Ruth would have received the telegram by now. Judge Hargrove's office opened at 8. If everything moved the way Clay had arranged it, the hearing could happen today. Not a full trial, a preliminary hearing. An emergency petition for legal recognition of Eleanor's will and the release of the trust. 40 minutes, maybe less, if Hargrove was efficient and the documentation was clean, if everything moved the way Clay had arranged it. The problem with plans built on multiple assumptions was that each assumption was a door, and any door could be closed by someone with the right key. He was halfway to Millhaven when he heard the horse behind him, single rider, moving fast, not trying to be quiet. Ethan pulled to the side of the road and waited, and the rider came over the rise and pulled up hard when he saw Ethan sitting still in the moonlight, and Ethan recognized Tom Aldridge by the shape of him before he could see the man's face. "Thank God," Aldridge said, breathing hard. His horse was lathered. "I've been riding your ridgeline for an hour. You weren't there." "What happened?" Aldridge steadied his horse and looked at Ethan with an expression that had moved past alarm into something grimmer. "Blackwell came to the ranch tonight. Not Pruitt. Blackwell himself, after midnight. He and Victor were in the study for 2 hours. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough." He paused. "They know she's gone to Bozeman. They don't know about the judge, but they know about Bozeman. Blackwell has a man there. Has had one there for weeks apparently watching the stage routes." Ethan went very still. "His name is Reeves," Aldridge continued. I heard Victor say it. Reeves is in Bozeman. And Blackwell told Victor that if Abigail makes any kind of legal move against the arrangement, Reeves has instructions to... He stopped, pressed his mouth together. He said Reeves would ensure she came home. Those were the words. Ensure she came home. The cold that moved through Ethan then had nothing to do with the October air. Does Reeves know about the judge, about Hargrove? I don't know. I don't think so. But if she goes to the courthouse, if she's seen, he'll know, Ethan said. Yes. Ethan turned his horse and looked north and east toward Bozeman, which was 60 miles away and unreachable in any time that mattered, and he did the arithmetic quickly and ruthlessly, the way Abigail would have done it, and arrived at the same answer every time. He could not reach her before she reached the courthouse. He could not warn her. She was already there, or nearly, and she was walking into a situation that had a man in it she didn't know about. And the only thing standing between her and that man was her own instincts, and whatever Clay's telegram had managed to convey to an aunt she hadn't seen in 14 years. Is there a telegraph office open in Millhaven at 4 in the morning? Ethan asked. No, 5:30. 90 minutes. He looked at Aldridge. Ride to Clay Adler's house. Wake him up. Tell him Reeves Bozeman Blackwell's man. Clay will know what to do with the Billings contact. If there's any way to get a warning to Hargrove's office before 8, what are you going to do? Ethan put his heels to his horse. I'm going to Bozeman, he said. Aldridge called after him. That's 60 miles, Ethan. You can't. Tom. He did not stop. Go wake up Clay. He pushed the horse as hard as he dared for the first 20 miles, switching to the remount. He had a younger animal faster that he had been keeping saddled at the relay station outside Millhaven for exactly the kind of situation that required moving quickly in the dark. The station keeper looked at him with the particular expression of men who had learned not to ask questions about riders in the pre-dawn hours, and Ethan tossed him the reins of the first horse and swung onto the second, and kept moving. The road to Bozeman was not complicated, but it was long, and long in Montana in late October meant cold that got into your hands and stayed there, and a sky that went from black to gray to a thin, reluctant blue without much enthusiasm. He rode through all of it and counted miles, and thought about Abigail Carter in a strange city with no money and no allies except an aunt she hadn't seen since childhood, and a document she hadn't known existed until 4 days ago. He thought about her voice at the Cottonwoods. Don't soften it. I need to know the real number. The real number right now was that she was 60 miles from the nearest person who knew what was coming, and she was about to walk into a courthouse with a man named Reeves, somewhere in the same city, waiting for exactly that moment. He rode harder. He reached Bozeman at 9:30, which meant the stage from the Eastern Way station had beaten him by at least an hour, which meant Abigail had been in this city for at least an hour, which meant anything could have already happened, or nothing had, and he had no way to know which until he knew where she was. He went to the courthouse first. Hargrove's office was on the second floor, and he took the stairs 2 at a time and found the door already open and a clerk inside who looked up with the mild irritation of a man interrupted mid-filing. Judge Hargrove, Ethan said. Is he in chambers? He has a petitioner, Abigail Carter. The clerk blinked. You know the petitioner. Is she in with him now? Is she all right? Sir, I can't disclose. The door to the inner chamber opened, and Clay Adler's friend, Judge Harrison Hargrove, stepped out, a lean man of 60 with sharp eyes behind wire spectacles and the bearing of someone who had been making difficult decisions for a long time and had not been softened by the experience. He looked at Ethan and then looked back into the chamber and said, Miss Carter, there is a man here claiming to know you. Ethan stepped past the clerk and looked through the open door. Abigail was seated at the table. Beside her sat a woman of 60 or so, with Eleanor Carter's eyes, not Abigail's exact eyes, but related enough that Ethan recognized the lineage immediately, who had to be Ruth, who was holding Abigail's left hand in both of hers. with the grip of a woman who had been waiting 14 years for this exact moment and was not going to let go of it quickly. Abigail looked at Ethan, and her composure, the careful stone face she wore for audiences, cracked open just slightly, the way a window cracks when there is too much pressure on one side of the glass. Not breaking, admitting. "He's with me," she said. Hargrove looked at Ethan for a long moment, with the evaluating look of a man who took the measure of people quickly and usually accurately. "You're Walker," he said. "Yes, sir." "Clay Adler speaks highly of you. That is not a short list." He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in. We were just reaching the difficult part." The difficult part was this. The original will was intact, and it was genuine, and Ruth had kept it in a locked box for 14 years, with the specific intention of producing it on the day it became necessary. Hargrove had examined it, verified the witness signatures, including Victor Carter's own hand, and declared it legally sound. The difficult part was that Jeremiah Blackwell's attorney had filed a counter-brief with the Bozeman Circuit Court 30 minutes before Abigail arrived. Ethan looked at Hargrove. "How did they know she was here?" Hargrove set the brief on the table. "The filing doesn't indicate knowledge of this specific proceeding. It's a preemptive protection of the marriage contract standard practice when one party anticipates a legal challenge." He looked over his spectacles. "But the timing suggests foreknowledge of this petition." "Reeves," Ethan said. Abigail turned to look at him. "Who is Reeves?" "Blackwell's man in Bozeman. He's been watching the stage routes." He looked at Hargrove. "Does the counter-brief delay the petition?" "It complicates it," Hargrove said carefully. "A counter-filing of this nature creates a procedural requirement for a full hearing with both parties present before I can issue a release of trust. That hearing cannot be scheduled on an emergency basis, minimum 3 business days." "Which eats the window," Ethan said. "Yes." The room was quiet. Ruth was still holding Abigail's hand. Abigail was looking at the will on the table, her mother's will in her mother's attorney's handwriting signed by her father's hand, and her expression had gone very still in a way that was different from the stone composure. This was something older. Grief maybe, or the thing underneath grief that doesn't have a name. Then she said quietly, but with absolute precision, "The counterbrief protects the marriage contract. Does it protect the contract, or does it protect Blackwell's claim to the land acquisition that the contract enables?" Hargrove looked at her. "Those are 2 separate filings." "Yes," she said. "They are." She looked up. "He filed to protect the marriage contract. Did he file to protect the land acquisition separately?" Hargrove turned back to the brief. He read for 30 seconds. Then he looked up, and something in his expression shifted the particular shift of a judge who has just seen a sharp legal mind find a door in a wall he had thought was solid. "He did not," Hargrove said. "The land acquisition is contingent on the marriage contract," Abigail said. "But the inheritance trust is contingent only on my identity as Eleanor Carter's daughter and my reaching the age of 25, which I do in 6 weeks." She kept her voice even. "If the marriage contract is delayed by the hearing process and I turn 25 before it is completed, the inheritance clause that requires marriage for early release becomes irrelevant. The trust releases automatically on my birthday, without requiring any contract." Hargrove was completely still. Ruth made a sound beside her, small, involuntary. The sound of a woman watching her sister's daughter do something Eleanor would have recognized. "You're asking me," Hargrove said slowly, "not to release the trust by emergency petition. You're asking me to issue an injunction delaying the marriage contract pending the full hearing. 3 business days becomes his problem, not mine," Abigail said. "If the contract is enjoined for 3 days, then 2 more. Then however long the full hearing takes, the wedding date passes. And when November comes, the money is yours regardless," Ethan said. "Yes." She looked at him. "And without the early inheritance, as part of the transaction, Blackwell's $40,000 to my father is buying land he can't access without my legal cooperation from a woman who is no longer dependent on anyone's permission to make decisions." She turned back to the judge. "The land acquisition collapses because I will not cooperate, and he cannot force me to once I have my own legal and financial standing." Hargrove took off his spectacles and set them on the table and looked at Abigail Carter with the expression of a man revising his understanding of the situation entirely. "Miss Carter," he said, "how old did you say you were?" 24, Your Honor. I'll be 25 on the 14th of November. "And you've been managing the operational records of a 400-acre cattle operation since you were 9, she said. "Keeping books since I was 6. He put his spectacles back on. "I'm going to need a few minutes with these documents," he said. The injunction took 40 minutes to draft and sign. 40 minutes in which Ethan stood by the window of the antechamber and watched the street below, looking for a man he had never seen, but whose presence he could feel, the way you could feel a storm before the clouds came, something in the air that had weight and direction and intent. He saw him at the 20-minute mark. He saw a man in a gray coat standing across from the courthouse entrance, not moving, not looking at anything in particular, which was exactly how a man looked when he was looking at something very specifically. Medium height, competent posture, the kind of stillness that was trained, not natural. Reeves. Ethan did not go down. Going down would confirm that the target was in the building and escalate the timeline. Instead, he went back to the chamber door and knocked once and said quietly, "We have a watcher on the street. How much longer?" Hargrove looked up. 10 minutes. "Can we use the building's back exit?" The clerk, who had been silently filing documents in the corner and pretending not to listen to any of the last 40 minutes, said without looking up. "Alley door past the records room. Takes you out on Morrow Street." "Thank you," Ethan said. He went back to the window. Reeves had not moved. Ethan studied him and thought about the geometry of the situation. A man watching the front door, a building with a back exit, a signed injunction that needed to travel from this courthouse back to Millhaven without being intercepted, and a woman who could not ride 60 miles on horseback in one day. He went back to the chamber, back to, "Miss Carter," he said. "Ruth, when we leave this building we go out the back, separately." Ruth takes the documents on the afternoon stage back through Billings Hargrove's courier seal. On the injunction makes it a legal instrument that cannot be interfered with on a public stage. "Ruth, can you do that?" Ruth, who had spent 14 years waiting and had apparently been doing so from a position of considerable backbone, looked at him and said, "Young man, I rode through the Wyoming Territory in a covered wagon with 3 children and a sick husband. I think I can manage a stagecoach." "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said. "And Abigail?" Ruth asked. He looked at Abigail. She was standing now holding her mother's will, the original which Hargrove had allowed her to hold, while the injunction was drafted, and she was looking at the document with the expression of someone holding something that was both a legal instrument and a piece of their own history. "She rides with me," Ethan said. Abigail looked up. 60 miles, she said. "We have 2 horses and a lead. We ride hard and we reach Millhaven before dark. By the time Reeves reports back to Blackwell, and Blackwell decides how to respond, the injunction will already be filed with the county circuit, and there will be nothing left to intercept." He paused. "It's going to be a long, cold ride." She folded the will carefully and tucked it into the inside of her coat against her body, where it would stay. "I've done hard things before," she said. They went out the alley door at 19 minutes past 10, and Ethan kept himself between Abigail and the mouth of the alley until they reached the horses he had tied on Morrow Street. And by the time Reeves had worked out that his targets had not exited through the front, they were already clear of Bozeman, and moving south at a pace that would have been uncomfortable for casual riding and was necessary for everything else. Abigail rode well. He had suspected she would. A woman who had been running a working ranch since childhood did not get there without knowing horses, and she matched his pace without comment and did not ask him to slow down, and they rode through the middle of the day in the cold air with the first real bite of winter in it, and spoke rarely because the pace did not invite conversation, and what conversation they did have was the functional kind. "Blackwell will know about the injunction by tonight," she said during a brief spell where they slowed the horses at a creek crossing. "He'll go to my father." "Yes." "My father will be—" She paused and he noticed she didn't finish the sentence with the word she started toward, which might have been furious or desperate or something else entirely. She finished it instead with, "He'll be frightened. He's never been frightened of me before. He won't know what to do with it." "Frightened men do unpredictable things," Ethan said. "I know." She looked ahead, not at him. "He is still my father. Whatever he has done and chosen and sold, he is still my father, and I am not—" She stopped again, breathed. "I am not going to pretend this doesn't cost something." He said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Some costs were real and had to be acknowledged even when you had chosen correctly and necessarily to pay them. They rode on. They reached the Millhaven County line at 6 in the evening, an hour after the sun had gone below the ridgeline, and Ethan felt the tension in him that had been building since 4 in the morning begin to shift, not release, not yet, but shift, the way a held breath shifts when you can finally see the surface. Then he heard the horses behind them, 3 riders, moving fast, coming from the south, not from Bozeman, from Millhaven, which meant they had not come from Reeves, which meant they had been sent from here from Victor or Blackwell or both, the moment word reached them that the morning's courthouse maneuver had happened. Ethan looked at Abigail. "Don't stop." "I see them," she said. "Don't look back. Keep your horse at pace." "Ethan." "Keep riding." He dropped back and let her move ahead, and turned his horse sideways across the road, and the 3 riders came up fast and pulled up hard when they found him blocking the way, their horses throwing their heads and stamping in the sudden stop. The man in front was Crane, the hired hand who had been following Abigail, the one loyal to Blackwell's money. Behind him were 2 men Ethan didn't know. "She needs to come back," Crane said. "Her father wants her home." "Her father's wants," Ethan said, "have been the problem all along." "This ain't a discussion, Walker." "No," Ethan said. "It isn't." Crane looked past him at Abigail's retreating figure in the fading light, calculating the distance, calculating whether he could go around. Ethan shifted his horse to mirror the calculation, and Crane's eyes came back to him, and they held each other's gaze in the cold and the quiet, and the particular tension of 2 men deciding simultaneously how far they were willing to go. "She has a legal injunction filed with the circuit court in Bozeman," Ethan said, "signed by Judge Harrison Hargrove, enjoining the marriage contract pending a full hearing. It is already on its way to the county circuit by stage and will be filed in the morning." He paused. "Whatever your employer told you about tonight, he told you before he knew that. I suggest you ride back and tell him what has changed." Crane stared at him. "She's not coming back tonight," Ethan said. "Not with you. Not the way he wants." The 2 men behind Crane looked at each other. Not trained men, hired men. There was a difference, and Ethan could see it clearly in how they held themselves, the posture of men who had signed on for intimidation work, and were now being asked to calculate whether this particular situation warranted something more serious, and finding the math uncomfortable. Crane looked at the road behind Ethan, where Abigail had disappeared into the gathering dark. Then he turned his horse. The 2 men followed without a word. Ethan waited until they were out of sight, then turned and rode hard after Abigail. She had stopped a quarter-mile up the road and was waiting for him, and when he came over the rise, and she saw it was him alone, she let out a breath that was the first completely unguarded thing he had seen from her in 6 days. "They're gone," he said. "For tonight," she said. "For tonight," he agreed. They rode the last 3 miles to Millhaven in the dark and went directly to Clay Adler's house, where Clay opened the door before they knocked. He had been watching for them, obviously had been watching for hours. And when he saw Abigail, he took both her hands in his ink-stained ones and said, "Your mother would be proud of you, child. I want you to hear that from someone who knew her." Abigail's composure, which had held through 60 miles of hard riding and a blocked road, and a man named Reeves, and a courtroom, and her father's name, signed on a document he had hidden from her for 15 years, finally did what it had been deciding about all day. It let go. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the quiet and private dissolution of something that had been held under enormous pressure for a very long time in the warm doorway of an old man's house in the dark, with two people present who knew what it had cost. Clay Adler patted her hands and did not say anything else, because he was wise enough to know that some moments did not need to be filled. Ethan stepped back and gave her the space, and stood in the cold outside the pool of lamplight and thought about Victor Carter going to his bottle tonight, knowing the walls had shifted, and Blackwell recalculating in the dark, and a signed injunction moving toward a circuit court filing that would hold, it would hold. Hargrove was meticulous, and 6 weeks until November 14th and $11,000 that had been waiting for a woman who had earned every cent of it 15 years ago. He thought about how much still had to happen before any of it was finished. And he thought about Abigail Carter's unguarded breath in the dark when she saw him come over that rise alone, and the way she had been waiting for him, and the way he had not questioned that she would be. He put that thought somewhere careful and left it there. There would be time for it later. Right now, Blackwell was still out there, and morning was coming, and the real fight, the one that would happen in the open in the town in front of people who would have to decide who they were, was still ahead of them. But tonight, Abigail Carter was safe, and her mother's will was real, and the injunction was filed. And for the first time in a very long time, the numbers were starting to move in the right direction. Clay Adler's spare room had a narrow bed and a quilt that smelled of cedar and old paper, and Abigail slept in it for 9 hours without moving, which Clay reported to Ethan the next morning with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had done something genuinely useful. Ethan had not slept at all. He had sat in Clay's kitchen through the night with a cup of coffee that went cold and a map of the county spread on the table, and thought through every move Blackwell had left. The injunction was filed. The wedding date was blocked. The ledgers were in Billings. The will was documented. Abigail would turn 25 in 6 weeks, and the inheritance would release automatically, and there was not a legal mechanism remaining that could stop it. On paper, it was over. But Jeremiah Blackwell had not built what he had built by accepting paper defeats. And Victor Carter had not controlled his daughter for 15 years by respecting the limits of his authority. And Dale Pruitt had not burned a wagon on a county road because his employer was a man who took losses gracefully. The danger had not passed. It had changed shape. Clay came downstairs at 6 and looked at the cold coffee and the map and Ethan's face and said, "You should have slept." "Tell me about Blackwell's operation," Ethan said. "Not the land. The men. How many does he run? How loyal are they, and who among them knows about the 3 wives?" Clay sat down. He was quiet for a moment in the way of a man deciding how much of what he knows to give. Then he said, "Blackwell keeps 6 full-time men. Pruitt is the top. 2 of the others, Harker and Cross, have been with him since New Mexico. They were there when Clara died." He paused. "The other 3 are recent hires, local boys. They don't know the history." "Harker and Cross," Ethan said. "If that history became public, they'd run," Clay said. "Men like that don't stay when the light comes on. They're loyal to money and silence in equal measure, and when one fails, the other follows." He looked at Ethan. "But making it public means naming names. It means a woman in New Mexico who may not want to be found, and a death that was called natural by a local doctor who was probably paid to call it that. It means evidence that doesn't exist in a form any court would accept quickly." "What about the other 2 wives?" "First wife was from St. Louis. Died of fever genuinely, I believe. Second wife was from a good Denver family. Her father is still alive, a man named Aldous Fenwick." Clay turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Fenwick has never been satisfied with the explanation of his daughter's death. I know this because he wrote to the Denver paper, and the Denver paper reprinted the letter, and a copy came to me through the journalist network." He paused carefully. "Fenwick is wealthy, he is angry, and he has been looking for someone to give him a reason to act for 3 years. Ethan looked at him. "You have a way to reach Fenwick," Ethan said. It was not a question. I sent him a telegram at 5 this morning, Clay said. Before you ask. Ethan looked at the old man with something that was close to genuine admiration. You were already ahead of me. I am always ahead of you, Clay said without particular pride. I have 50 years of practice. The question is whether Fenwick can move fast enough to matter. He set down the cup. He's in Denver. If he takes the first available northbound train, he can be in Billings by tomorrow night. If he has documentation of his own letters, the original death report, anything, and he is willing to present it formally. It becomes a pattern, Ethan said. Not one accusation, a pattern. Across 3 states. Which is a different kind of legal problem than a will dispute, Clay said. That kind of problem does not get resolved by a county clerk loyal to the town council. That kind of problem goes to federal jurisdiction. Ethan sat back. Federal. The word had weight. Blackwell's money reached a long way, but money that reached county officials and practical sheriffs and friendly clerks did not automatically reach federal judges who had their own politics and their own pride and very little patience for men who had made fools of the territorial legal system. How long does Fenwick need? Ethan asked. I asked him 48 hours, Clay said. Whether he can deliver in 48 hours, I don't know, but if he's half as angry as his letter suggested, he'll try. 48 hours. Ethan thought about what Blackwell would do in 48 hours. With the wedding enjoined and Abigail in Mill Haven, and the ledgers in Billings, and the will documented, and an old newspaper man sending telegrams in the dark, Blackwell would not sit still. Men like Blackwell never sat still when they were losing. They accelerated. He heard Abigail on the stairs. She came into the kitchen dressed and composed and looked at the map on the table and the cold coffee and Ethan's face and said without sitting down, "Tell me what I've missed." He told her. She listened without interrupting. Which he had come to understand was her particular form of intensity. Not stillness exactly, but the focused attention of someone filing every detail in real time, organizing it, testing it against what she already knew. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, and then she said, "Fenwick, does he know about the third wife, Clara?" "I don't know," Clay said. "I told him what I know. Whether he has his own information about New Mexico, I can't say." "If he does," Abigail said, "and if Harker and Cross know that he's coming and that he has documentation, they'll leave. You said they'd run when the light came on. Blackwell loses his 2 most experienced men, and his operational knowledge of what happened in New Mexico goes with them." "Yes," Clay said. "Then Blackwell needs to move before Fenwick arrives," she said. "Which means the next 48 hours are the most dangerous." Both men looked at her. "He's not going to come at the legal case anymore," she said. "He can't. The injunction is filed, the will is documented, Fenwick is on a train. The legal architecture is in place, and he knows it." She put her hands flat on the table and looked at the map. "He's going to come at the ranch. He's going to pressure my father into doing something that bypasses the legal process entirely. Something that creates a situation where I have to respond rather than wait." "What kind of situation?" Ethan asked, though he thought he already knew. She looked at him directly. "The ranch is still my father's legal property. If my father invites Blackwell to take possession of the property pending the resolution of the hearing. A voluntary transfer. Not a sale, just a management arrangement. Then Blackwell's men are on that land legally. Tom is off it. The livestock, the records, the physical operation." She stopped. "Tom is still at the ranch. Tom and the 2 hands who are loyal to the work." Ethan was already standing. "How quickly can you be on a horse?" he said. "Time." They rode to the Carter ranch with Clay's unsigned letter in Ethan's coat. The letter that detailed Fenwick's existence, and the telegram, and the federal jurisdiction question, not because the letter would stop anyone, but because information deployed at the right moment to the right person sometimes did what force couldn't. The right person in this case was Tom Aldridge. But when they came through the north gate and into the yard, Tom was not the one who came out to meet them. Victor Carter was. He stood on the porch with the bearing of a man who had made a decision in the night and had come out the other side of it, altered, not softer, something more complicated than softer. He looked at his daughter on the horse beside Ethan, and something moved through his face that was too quick and too unguarded to be controlled. A man seeing something he had not expected to feel, and not having the emotional language to manage it. He looked older than he had 3 days ago. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. Not tired. Older. The particular aging that happens not from time, but from the collapse of a certainty you had been using as a structural support. "Abigail," he said. She dismounted. She did not run to him. She did not hang back with hostility. She walked to the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her father, with a face that held something Ethan had not seen on her before. Not the stone composure, and not the careful control, but something open and exhausted and real. The face of a daughter who had spent 24 years hoping for something different, and had finally stopped pretending that the hope didn't hurt. "Did Blackwell come last night?" she asked. Victor's jaw worked. "This morning, early." "What did he offer you?" Silence. "Papa." Her voice was very quiet. The word itself was different from how she had been saying it in Ethan's presence, less formal, less managed. An older word, a younger voice using it. "What did he offer you?" "He said he could still—" Victor stopped. "He said if you came back today, if we moved the ceremony to a civil proceeding. No public event, the injunction could be—" "The injunction cannot be circumvented by a civil ceremony," she said. "The injunction covers any formalization of the contract regardless of venue. He knows that. He told you otherwise." Victor looked at her. "He said his lawyer is wrong or lying. Probably the second." She stepped up one step. "Papa, Jeremiah Blackwell killed his second wife. Her father is on a train right now from Denver with documentation. In 48 hours, this becomes a federal matter, and every man associated with Blackwell's operation becomes a person of interest." She paused. "You are still associated with his operation. You signed a contract with him. Your name is in his business record." Victor went very still. "I am not telling you this to frighten you," she said. "I am telling you because you are my father, and because whatever you have done and chosen and arranged without asking me, I do not want to watch you go down with a man who does not care whether you do." The yard was completely silent. Ethan stood at the horses and did not move and did not speak, and understood that this moment did not belong to him in any way. Victor Carter looked at his daughter for a long time. The look of a man examining something he had been avoiding examining. Then he said in a voice that had dropped all of its authority, and was simply the voice of a man who was tired, and maybe afraid, and definitely old. "What do you need from me?" Abigail breathed. "A written statement," she said, "to Clay Adler, confirming that you knew about Eleanor's will and did not disclose it. Confirming that you knew the operational records were in my hand. Confirming that the management decisions of this property for the past 15 years were mine." She paused. "It's a hard statement to give. It will damage your standing. But it protects you from federal association with Blackwell, and it gives the hearing a foundation that ends quickly instead of dragging for months." Victor closed his eyes, just for a moment. Then he opened them. "Tom," he called without looking away from Abigail. Aldridge appeared from the barn moving fast, reading the yard in one look the way experienced ranchmen did. "Saddle up and ride to Adler's office," Victor said. "Tell him Victor Carter wants to make a statement, and he'd like to do it today." Tom looked at Abigail. She gave him the smallest nod. He turned back to the barn without a word, and was on a horse in 4 minutes and out the gate in 5. Victor looked at Ethan for the first time. The look of a man assessing someone he has been thinking about as an enemy, and revising that category in real time, which was its own kind of difficult. "You could have handled this differently," Victor said. "You could have come to me." "I tried that," Ethan said evenly. "You told me to get on my horse." Something that might in a different man, at a different moment, have become defensiveness passed through Victor's face and dissolved. He had nothing left to defend it with. "Come inside," he said. The statement took 2 hours to write, and another hour for Clay, who came personally rather than sending a messenger to witness and notarize. Victor did not embellish and did not minimize. He stated what he had known, and when he had known it in the flat factual language of a man who had decided that the only remaining currency he had was honesty and intended to spend it carefully. When it was finished, Clay folded it and put it in his coat, and looked at Victor Carter with the expression of a man who had known him for 26 years and was not sure any more what to make of him, which was at least more complicated than contempt. "The hearing will be scheduled within the week," Clay said. "With this statement and the Billings documentation and the judge's existing review of the will, I expect the proceeding to take half a day." "And Blackwell?" Victor asked. "Fenwick arrives tomorrow night. I have sent his telegram contents to the Federal Land Office in Helena. Whether that produces an investigation is not in my hands." Clay picked up his hat. "But Blackwell will know by tonight that Fenwick is coming, and men who know federal attention is arriving generally make decisions about their operations very quickly." Victor was quiet. "He'll pull out," Ethan said. "The land acquisition without the marriage contract and without the inheritance and with a federal inquiry opening is a losing position. He'll cut it and move on to the next county." "And my 40,000, Victor said. Not greedy, asking. The voice of a man who had made a catastrophically bad trade and was tallying the actual cost. "Gone," Ethan said. "It was always contingent on the contract completing. The contract won't complete." Victor looked at his hands. "I spent 15 years building this ranch," he said. "No," Abigail said from across the table. She said it without heat, without accusation, simply and clearly the way she stated figures in a ledger. "You spent 15 years living on a ranch I built. That's not the same thing, Papa. And I need you to know that I know the difference and that I need you to know it too before we can figure out what happens next." The room was very quiet. Victor Carter did not argue. That was the thing that Ethan would remember afterward, not the statement, not the capitulation, not even the moment on the porch. He would remember that Victor Carter sat at his own kitchen table and heard his daughter tell him the plain truth about his life and did not argue. The silence of a man who has run out of the energy required to maintain a lie. "What does happen next?" Victor asked. Abigail looked at him steadily. "November 14th, the trust releases. I have legal control of the inheritance. I have the management record in my name." She paused. "I would like to continue managing this ranch, under a formal agreement, not as a daughter doing unpaid work, as the operational manager of record with legal standing and compensation." Victor was quiet for a long moment. "It would mean the ranch continues," she said. "And it would mean I have a reason to stay." She looked at him with clear eyes. "You've given me a lot of reasons to leave. I'd like one reason to stay. That's what I'm offering you." Clay put on his hat and stood up and looked at Ethan with an expression that said they were both surplus to requirements at this particular moment, and they went outside and left father and daughter in the kitchen with the remains of a difficult conversation, and the beginning, possibly, of a different one. Blackwell left the county the following morning, not quietly. Nothing Blackwell did was quiet. He closed his operation over one night, pulled his 6 men, including Pruitt, including Harker and Cross, loaded what was portable, and was gone before Fenwick's train reached Billings. The Blackwell property sat empty by noon, gates open, livestock unattended, the physical evidence of a man who had calculated his losses and moved on with the efficiency of someone who had done it before and would do it again somewhere else. Ethan heard about it from Sheriff Mackey, who rode up to the ridge that afternoon with the expression of a man who was simultaneously relieved and embarrassed and trying to find a version of events that allowed him to feel neither. "He's gone," Mackey said, sitting his horse in Ethan's yard. "I know," Ethan said. "Fenwick is in Billings. He's been in contact with the Federal Land Office. There's going to be an inquiry into Blackwell's acquisitions across 3 territories. Mackey paused. "It won't go anywhere quickly. These things never do. But it puts his name in a federal record that follows him." "Good," Ethan said. Mackey looked at him. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad it went the way it went." "Are you?" Ethan said, not unkindly. "I have a daughter," Mackie said. "I said that before." "You did." "I meant it." Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "I know you did, Cord. That's why you're still the sheriff." Mackie almost smiled. He tipped his hat and rode back down the ridge, and Ethan stood in the yard and looked south toward the Carter ranch and felt something in his chest settle, not completely, not finally, but enough. The particular settling of a man who has been braced against impact for a long time and has just received the information that the worst of it has passed. Aldous Fenwick was a compact man of 60, with his daughter's eyes and the bearing of someone who had been carrying a specific grief for 3 years and had organized his entire life around it without letting it show. He arrived in Millhaven 4 days after Blackwell left, because the federal contact in Helena had asked him to come down and make his statement in person, and Millhaven was on the way. He sat across from Abigail in Clay Adler's office, and Ethan stood by the window because it was not his meeting, but he was not going to be elsewhere either. And Fenwick looked at Abigail with a complicated expression and said, "Clara would have been your age now. My daughter. The one he married." Abigail said, "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Fenwick said. "Be what you are. My daughter was also very capable and very young, and the wrong man convinced someone who should have protected her that it was a good arrangement." He looked at his hands. "At least your father stopped in time." "He nearly didn't," Abigail said honestly. "No, but nearly is different from didn't." He looked up. "My daughter didn't get nearly. She got all the way to the end of it." His voice was even, controlled, the voice of a man who had made his peace with a grief that would never entirely end and had decided to make it useful instead. "I want you to know that whatever I can do from Denver to support the legal proceeding here, I will do. I have resources, and I have documentation, and I have 3 years of anger with nowhere to go, and I would like to put it somewhere that means something." Abigail looked at him for a moment, with the expression she reserved for things that cost her something to receive gratitude, that she was still learning how to hold without deflecting. "Thank you," she said. "I'd like that." When Fenwick left, the office was quiet for a moment, and then Clay said, with the pragmatic tenderness of a man who had been in the newspaper business long enough to know that justice was real, but slow, "The hearing is set for Friday. 2 days." "I know," Abigail said. "You should sleep before then." "I will." She looked at Ethan. He was still by the window. He had been watching the street out of habit. Not necessity. Blackwell's men were gone. Reeves was gone. The immediate threat had dissolved into the cold November air. He was watching the street because it was something to do that wasn't looking at her directly, which he had been carefully not doing for the past several days, because the careful distance felt important, and he wasn't sure he could maintain it if he closed it. "Walk with me," she said. He walked with her. They went down Prentice Street in the afternoon cold, and she walked beside him without the hurried economy of her usual stride, slower the walk of someone who has finally been given permission to take up space and is learning how to do it. She had her mother's will in her coat. Still, she had been carrying it since Bozeman, and he understood why the way you understood why a person kept a thing that proved something they needed proven. "The hearing on Friday," she said. "Clay says it will take half a day." "He's right." "And after that?" She paused. "I have thought about after that in the abstract for years, as a theoretical destination, as a thing I was working toward without quite believing I would reach it." She looked ahead. "I don't know what I thought it would feel like." "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Strange," she said. "Very quiet, like a room you've been trying to get into for a long time, and when the door finally opens, it's just a room." She paused. "And then you realize the room is the beginning, not the end, and the real question is what you build in it." He said nothing. He walked beside her and let the words be what they were. "Tom has agreed to stay on," she said. "Under the new arrangement. He will be the foreman of record, and I will be the operational manager, and we will run the ranch the way it should have been run for the past 15 years, which is to say, the way I have actually been running it, but with my name on the door." She glanced at him. "My father will be there. It will be not easy, but there is something in him that is reachable, I think. Something that was reachable all along, and that I stopped believing in, and I'm not sure yet whether it's wise to start believing in it again. But I would like to try." "That sounds like you," Ethan said. She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means you're the kind of person who does the hard thing when the easy thing is available," he said. "You could have left. You could have taken the inheritance in November and started somewhere new. But you're staying and you're building and you're extending your father more grace than he's earned because that's what the numbers say is right, and your mother taught you to trust the numbers." She was quiet for a moment. "You've been paying attention," she said. "I've been paying attention," he agreed. They turned at the end of Prentice Street and stood at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open ground, and the wind came down off the ridges cold and clean, and the sky was the pale blue of late October with the first suggestion of what November was going to bring. "Ethan," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name without it being an accident or an emergency. "Yes," he said. "What do you want?" He looked at her. She was asking the question the way she asked every question directly without decoration. The way you asked a question when you needed the real answer and had no patience for anything else. The question had weight behind it that they both understood, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. "I want to be near this," he said. "Near you. Not close enough to crowd out what you're building. You don't need another man making decisions about your life, and I have no intention of being that. But near." He paused. "My ridge is 4 miles north. That's near." She looked at him for a long time. 4 miles is near?" she said. "It is." "And if I need more than 4 miles for a while, then I'll be on my ridge," he said. "And I'll be there when 4 miles is enough." She was quiet. Not the controlled composure quiet. Not the stone face quiet. The quiet of a woman standing in the first real freedom of her life, and feeling the full weight of it, and choosing carefully and deliberately what to do with the choosing. "Come to the ranch on Saturday," she said. "After the hearing, I'll cook." He almost smiled. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," she said. "That's why I'm doing it." The hearing on Friday lasted 3 hours, not half a day. Judge Hargrove, with Victor Carter's statement and Eleanor's original will, and 15 years of operational ledgers, and Clay Adler's 6-year-old favor, all assembled in a Billings courtroom, issued a ruling that was 22 pages long and contained within it the full legal recognition of Abigail Carter's management role, the release of Eleanor's inheritance trust, and a formal notation that the marriage contract between Abigail Carter and Jeremiah Blackwell was void as of the date of injunction and could not be refiled in this jurisdiction. Abigail sat at the plaintiff's table and heard it read aloud in the measured cadence of legal language and kept her face composed throughout, which was what she did, which was what she had always done, and which was different now from what it had been before, because now the composure was a choice and not a survival mechanism. Afterward, on the courthouse steps in the November cold, she stood beside Clay and Ruth, who had stayed in Billings for the hearing and who was not letting go of her niece's arm any time soon, and looked out at the street and breathed. $11,000 and a management agreement, and a father who was beginning slowly and imperfectly to understand the daughter he had. A ranch that bore her fingerprints on every fence post and every ledger entry and every healthy head of cattle. A town that had watched what happened and would remember it. Ethan had not come to the hearing. She had not asked him to. Some things you needed to do in your own name only, and he understood that without being told. He was at the ranch when she got back on Saturday. Not at the door. At the fence, same as always, the horse tied at the post, and his hat pulled against the wind, and his hands at rest on the rail. Waiting the way a man waited when he was comfortable with waiting, when he had somewhere to be, and was already there. She came out to meet him. "Well," he said. "Done," she said. He looked at her. The real look, the one that didn't calculate distance or manage space, but simply saw what was there, and she held it, and the distance between the fence and where she was standing was exactly right. Not too much and not too little. The distance of two people who had arrived at something together and were taking a moment to know it before they moved. "Come in," she said. "I made coffee." He opened the gate and walked through it, and she walked beside him toward the house, and for the first time in her memory, the yard felt like hers, the ground felt like hers, the air felt like hers, and the man walking beside her was there because she had asked him, and not because anyone had arranged it, and the difference between those two things was everything. Abigail Carter had spent 24 years surviving other people's decisions about her life. On a cold Saturday in November of 1878, she walked across her own yard with a man who had ridden toward her scream instead of away from it. And she felt the full, solid weight of what it meant to be a woman who had stopped being survived and started being lived fully freely on her own terms and no one else's. That was not a small thing. That was everything.